Senator Tammy Baldwin joining more than 100 congressional Democrats now calling for the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to be impeached. This comes amid sharp criticism of the Trump administration following the shooting death of Green Bay native Alex Preddy over the weekend. He is the second person killed at the hands of immigration agents this month in Minneapolis, following Renee Good's death in early January. Senator Baldwin, among other Senate Democrats, demanding reforms to ICE ahead of key spending bill votes.
I refuse to give ICE and DHS a blank check to keep acting lawlessly, putting Americans' lives at risk and making our communities less safe.
Congress has to pass an appropriations bill before this Friday to avoid a partial government shutdown. Meanwhile, President Trump saying he does not believe Alex Preddy approached federal officers as an assassin, as his deputy chief of staff said hours after Preddy's death. However, the president said protesters can't have guns. Many Trump supporters are insisting Second Amendment rights apply even in the case of Preddy. President Trump meeting with DHS Secretary Noem and several other top administration officials in the Oval Office on Monday night, according to reports from the New York Times and others. During that nearly 2-hour meeting, the president did not threaten to take away Noem or her senior advisor, Corey Lewandowski, their jobs. The group did have a conversation about how to continue carrying out the president's immigration agenda. Border Czar Tom Homan arriving in Minneapolis today, and he did meet with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. This after Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bavino was removed from the city by President Trump. The governor's office said Walz and Homan agreed on the need for ongoing dialogue and Minnesota's priorities, quote, impartial investigations into the Minneapolis shootings involving federal agents, a swift, significant reduction in the number of federal forces in Minnesota, and an end to the campaign of retribution against Minnesota, end quote.